Well, it's my first experience of judging a debate actually in school, but I have seen quite a few debates recently at ISKL. And I thought, in terms of when I saw at ISKL, the standard here today was very, very high. And the level of speakers and their control and their ideas and so on was really impressive.
I felt that the debate hinged too much on one element, which was the definition of obligation. So in a sense, it wasn't the best debate that you could possibly have had from this motion. Wasn't the debate itself did not achieve its maximum potential.
You had to listen carefully. It lasts for quite a long time, so it's a question of taking lots of notes and listening to whether the arguments are actually picked up on and the rebuttals are appropriate and their points are actually rebutted. And I thought the negative team did that extremely well today, that they picked up on points and they rebutted them and they added points of their own so that they were much more convincing in what they were saying and spoke with more conviction.
As I said, first of all, it hinged a lot on the definition of obligation, which I think that the negative side handled much better than the affirmative side. Secondly, I mean, most of it is based on that, because the whole debate was about what obligation is about, and I thought that the negative did a better job because they examined the case of affirmative and then they showed how the affirmative derived that definition of obligation, which was from guilt, and then they explained how it isn't the most effective way of looking at the problem if we're only assessing who is more obliged to deal with the problem if we're only looking at guilt. Instead, they talked about common interests and how practical of a solution is it to look at it in terms of guilt or what negative was proposing. And I thought that made a much more convincing argument when it came to the definition for the negative side. And I also felt that although I would add that the negative team did not do as good of a job as they could have, because there were a few big weaknesses in the affirmative's case. For example, the second argument, which is about how MEDCs had greater expertise, money, and basically they're more capable to deal with the problem and therefore they have a greater obligation. That, first of all, the negative team did not address that. Well, yeah, they did not have to address that under the circumstances of the definition. They didn't have to, but they should have addressed it to kill off that argument. They could have said that, environmentally friendly policies do not have to come from exorbitant policies. You can come from very simple policies as long as they're widespread across the countries, recycling campaigns, the use of different kind of light bulbs. These kind of policies are not expensive. They don't need to come from the funds of a developed country. A developing country could do it as well. And then there was the whole thing about trying your best. The affirmative team brought up how trying your best wasn't good enough, because that was what the negative was saying. The negative was saying that everyone has to try their best, every country has to try their best, and then they said that trying your best is not good enough. Now, what the negative should have done was point out that, if the affirmative felt that trying your best isn't good enough, then what exactly were they proposing? They were proposing less of an obligation. Therefore, they were saying that, hey, you don't have to try your best, you try less than your best. If trying your best is not good enough, what is trying less than your best? So, yeah, there were a few big weaknesses in the affirmative team which should have been addressed. But overall, I gave it the negative because they handled the definition better and they looked at the core of the problem more effectively than the affirmative did.
On a personal level, I would have thought that the negatives have a good point in saying that all nations need to be involved, at least. But it is the developed countries who have the money and the expertise and the knowledge to be able to deal with climate change, and so the onus has to be on them, at least to lead the way. Not to take over completely, but certainly to lead the way and provide the funds and the research and so on.
Okay. Thank you.
I think generally the obligation is, I think you have to look at it in terms of a time frame. It is a very ideal point of view, I know, but generally speaking, I think that developed countries have a greater obligation in the sense that they should be dealing with it now. And I think developing countries should be given a little more leeway than developed countries, because as the affirmative side pointed out, there are numerous developing countries which suffer from greater problems, immediate problems, problems which should be looked at first. So, and if you look at the developing countries, they don't pollute as much. I mean, as one country, they don't pollute as much as the developed countries do. So, I think that developed countries, yeah, I think that they have a greater obligation in general. However, I think that that discrepancy in their obligation should not last for too long a time. I mean, there needs to be a time frame. They should come up with like some sort of framework, come up with a time frame, how long exactly developing countries will be allowed to have that leeway. Because otherwise, it then makes sense that you are just allowing the developing countries to repeat the mistakes of the developed countries.
Okay, thank you.